I do think violin is a really cool instrument in the sense that it can be very vocal. I think it can be very vocal. I think it can be gritty. I think it can be I think it can be musical. I think it can be emotional. I think it's very versatile. And I don't think the general public knows how versatile it can really be.
Yeah. How does a building or a bridge or any structure speak to you? And when you look up at the night sky and see the moon and planets and stars, what do they whisper? And what does an instrument like a violin say when it's played? We can shed light on the answers to all of these questions and show how they are connected with the work and life story of our guest, Emanuel Wynter. Growing up in New York City, the Charlotte violinist was convinced he was going to be an architect and perhaps speak the language of form and function. Having played violin throughout childhood and early adulthood, he found that this itch to play music could be much more than a pastime, and upon taking on paying gigs while studying in college for interior architecture, made it his career. Music opened up a way for Emanuel to transition from expressing himself with interior space to expounding on his fascination with outer space, like he does in the title track to his live album From Orbit, which you're hearing now. I spoke with Emanuel Wynter in his hometown of Charlotte about how he plays violin in a variety of music settings, including his own style of soul, jazz, and rock, over to session work and a praise band, and how his early love of blues and rock music translates to the instrument, which is far more versatile and expressive than you might expect. We touch on the 3 boxes that he needs to check before taking on a gig and what he wants to get across with his lyrics as well. All that and more, including more music, is straight ahead. I'm Joe Kendrick, welcoming you to our episode on Emanuel Wynter on Southern Songs and Stories. Southern Songs and Stories is a podcast series with over 150 episodes, profiling artists ranging from Americana to blues and bluegrass, and from rock to rap. From history to hits, and from culture to creativity, you'll find a wide array of subjects, substance, and standpoints. And always, the music that binds it together. You can follow Southern Songs and Stories wherever you find podcasts, with more articles, photos, and videos at southernsongsandstories.com. And you can engage with us on social media, on Facebook, Instagram, Substack, and on YouTube at Joe Kendrick NC. I'm Joe Kendrick for WNCW and Southern Songs and Stories, sitting with Emanuel Wynter here in Charlotte. Where are we today, Emanuel?
We are at Not Just Coffee. It's one of my favorite spots. I'm very picky about where I get coffee from, and this is one of the places I trust. So
I already saw you get a very warm greeting from somebody coming out, so they seem to know you.
Yeah, that was funny enough. That was Pastor Andy at Factory Church. I play there every once in a while when I'm Sunday mornings when I'm available, when I'm not, too far out of town on a Saturday.
Yeah. What's the spirit like in that church? How does the music go?
The music is great. Everybody on the worship team is super talented. A lot of energy there. A lot of energy, and Pastor Andy also brings energy. So it's a big time. He'll come out on stage and he'll sing with us, and it's a good time.
Do you have a church background?
Not really.
Okay. Didn't come up playing in church, singing in church, anything like that?
No, not really. When I was living in New York, there was a small church that my mom and I went to, and I played there a little bit, but I don't have the church background that people usually think of when they think of, you know, growing up in the church and playing church and cutting their teeth there. I didn't really get that.
Okay. So what's good about today? What's happening with Emanuel Wynter and everything in Charlotte?
It's a nice day today. You know, we're in the high 50s right now, I think. I left the house. I'm here now. I've got a studio session with Austin McNeil later. And that's my day.
What kind of music does Austin McNeil play?
Country. He's a country
Okay.
artist, yeah.
All right, so now let's get into the mindset of what your music is to cross over into a country framework. How do you do that?
You know, I get asked to play country a lot, just because country and folk they're so prevalent here in North Carolina and in the Carolinas in general, in the South, of course. So I get asked to join people to do session work for that kind of stuff quite a bit. So it's not necessarily uncomfortable, you know.
Yeah.
It's also not necessarily my background, but
Yeah.
But I do it quite a bit, and it's a good time.
Thinking about reference points, people that you've mentioned as being influential, somebody that you look up to, you know, jazz artists like Regina Carter, or sort of rock and roll context, a blues context, Papa John Creech, but fiddle in country, and of course it is a fiddle in country, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're doing double stops, you're doing a kind of a different perspective, you're coming at it differently. So how do you pick up on doing that versus what you've done with your own work?
I would say I use double stops a lot, regardless of the genre. I think when you're playing a song, you want to be intentional about the space that you take up. You want to be efficient with it. So, you know, if I'm comping, if I'm, you know, supporting, if I'm in the soup of sound that's supporting the main vocals or the main instruments, I'll do a lot of double stops. So, the double stops in the country realm, they know what they're doing. Like it's a great technique to use, generally. So I just use it all the time. As far as the language, and I call it language, between genres, I feel that it's not necessarily too big of a gap per se, just because a lot of the language is blues derived. Sometimes more so in a live context than in a studio context. I might bring in some language that might be considered jazz-ish, but I always try to fit the song as in the best way that I can. That's always the goal. As far as my music, I feel like I really want to incorporate that, like soul, the rock, some jazz into there. I try and get a blend of those things in there.
You know, blues being the fountainhead for all music styles that originated in America, it makes a lot of sense that you have that as the foundation. So for the uninitiated, when we use musical terms like double stop, Can you walk us through some of that? How does somebody listening to a country song or an R&B song recognize that?
Yeah, so a double stop on the violin. So violin has, well, I can't even say that. Generally, violins have 4 strings, but they can have more than that. There are 7-string violins out there in the world. My acoustic violins are both 4 strings. My electrics are 5 strings. Goes down to a viola C. But a double stop is where I'm playing 2 notes at the same time on multiple strings. And I do that to complement whatever chord I'm playing over. So, if we're getting into music, right? If I'm playing over a C chord, the notes are going to be C, E, G. So I might play an E and a G or an E and a C over that. Sometimes I'll play octaves. It depends also on the context of the chord. But yeah, I'm just picking 2 notes that work with the chord, and I'm just trying to create an environment, an overall contribute to the overall environment of the song to help, get whatever point that the song is trying to get across. Now we stand right here as winners, 'cause we bet on romance. Hey, stranger, I wanna see you. Wanna learn about what makes you move. Come out with me. Stranger, I wanna see you, darling. I wanna learn about what makes you move. Come out with me.
That's a bit of Emanuel Wynter's song titled Stranger from his live collection From Orbit, which is an example of Emanuel employing a double stop on the violin. The stop part of double stop simply refers to pressing the strings to the fingerboard on the instrument, so stopping the strings instead of leaving them open. Here is an example of double stop in a country context, or Western swing more specifically, from the legendary Texas fiddler Johnny Gimble, playing the song Barefoot Fiddler. Now, going back to Emanuel Wynter's earlier comment about how vocal the violin can be, check this out. This is Bonaparte's Retreat, played by Fiddlin' Arthur Smith and his Dixieliners, an old-time song that dates back to the 19th century. Can you hear the mocking tone at the beginning? It's a song that was played by retreating soldiers in the Civil War, and while it ostensibly points to Napoleon's retreat from his ruinous invasion of Russia, The irony of the mocking nature of the opening strain was that Napoleon was also famous for retreating in order to lure his enemies into a counterattack. The fact that the violin is often stereotyped as fitting only within classical music or country music and country-adjacent genres like old-time and bluegrass makes it all the more notable in a context like what Emanuel Wynter plays. It seems that the full range of the instrument is often overlooked, and violin is seldom thought of as a lead instrument by and large. In our conversation, I recalled an earlier interview with Old Crow Medicine Show's Ketch Secor, who talked about wanting to play electric guitar as a kid, but coming around to the fiddle instead, which set him on a completely different course musically, while still holding to his dream of becoming, as he put it, a rock god. I asked Emanuel about the strengths of violin taking the lead.
I want to say I had that same thought process in like middle school and high school. I wanted to play guitar. You're a kid, you see guitar's cool, and then when I started, developing my own taste in music, I was listening to a lot of blues rock, all that stuff, and that's being played by guitarists. So I'm like, yeah, I want to learn how to play guitar. I want to learn how to play this stuff. But I also had the thought, I was like, man, I play violin already. Why can't I play violin but play those styles of music? I do think violin is a really cool instrument in the sense that it can be very vocal. I think it can be very vocal. I think it can be gritty. I think it can be I think it can be musical. I think it can be emotional. I think it's very versatile. Yeah. And I don't think the general public knows how versatile it can really be. Yeah. So
I think it gets pigeonholed a lot.
It does, and it frustrates me sometimes. But that's also why, whenever I get an opportunity to host a clinic or go talk to like high school, middle school kids about playing violin and all the things you can do with it, I always get really excited about those opportunities because people got to know, and especially talking to kids, like whether they grow up deciding to play violin or not, like, know it's a possibility. I feel like a lot of, and this goes beyond music, but like we need to know what we can do, whether you make the decision or not. Know that it's an option. Yeah, that's how I feel about that.
So I'd like to talk just a little bit about the style and innovation that you bring to the violin. And not long ago, I saw a talk with the fiddle player Casey Dreesen, who lives in Nashville. And he told a story about how percussion was born with the violin. And it's a story that I didn't know at the time, but back in the 60s, Bill Monroe had a fiddle player named Richard Green who was having trouble keeping time. I think he had maybe an injury or something with his wrist or his arm that was part of the reason why he couldn't quite keep up on the fiddle. And Bill Monroe suggested that he just basically keep rhythm with a chop. And at that point, the mandolin was standard for what they call the chop to keep time. And so he basically, out of necessity and almost by accident, invented the chop on violin. And then a violinist, fiddle player like Darrell Anger picked it up and really pushed it way forward. And then people like Casey Dreesen that come after him are doing all sorts of interesting things with percussion on the violin and the fiddle, and using, in Casey's case, lots of pedals and loops, and working and playing like with a drummer, like as a duo and things like that. So with that in mind, can you talk about some of the possibilities with the violin and what you bring to it?
Certainly. So one of my big things, like I talked about, listening to blues and blues rock in high school and wanting to play that on my violin. Somewhere along the way, I found that I really liked playing through tube amps. For multiple reasons, especially if you're playing in a band environment with a drum kit with other instrumentalists, it can get pretty loud, and an acoustic violin isn't necessarily going to keep up with that. A lot of violinists, when they plug in, they like to go direct, which is cool. But then when you go direct, you are at the mercy of the sound engineer or whatever capabilities of the PA system that you're playing through that night. So one reason is I want to be able to hear myself on stage. I don't want to have to depend on anybody to hear myself. An amp will fix that. The first amp that I ever bought for my violin was a Fishman Loudbox, which is pretty standard. I would recommend that amp. It's a great amp for acoustic instruments, for violin, for electric violin. But then I bought a Fender Blues Deluxe reissue. That was the first tube amp that I bought, and I could hear myself, and people could hear me, and I like the sound that it provided. This is a thing that violinists talk about endlessly. Is you have a piezo pickup on your instrument. Most of the times it's a bridge pickup, so they put the pickup in the bridge. And then when they plug it into something, they realize, man, it doesn't sound like my acoustic violin. Unfortunately, a piezo pickup will never sound like an acoustic violin. There's a lot that goes into the sound of an acoustic violin, but what you can do with a piezo pickup, you can do things to that signal to make it sound better. And one of the underrated things that you can do, because everybody wants to talk about reverb and delay and octave and all these things, which are great things, but to make a piezo sound less sterile and a little bit more interesting, a little bit of overdrive. A tube amp is going to do that. It comes with the DNA of what a tube amp is. So the overtones that it adds, I really like. So that was the main thing. I wanted to play through tube amp, and I've had to fight with sound engineers over the years. I still do sometimes. Where I'll pull up to the gig with my amp, and they'll be like, "No, just go direct." I'm like, "No, I have my amp." It's not your job to tell me what to play through. But that's a whole nother story. But
I've seen this movie.
Oh man, and then I've had them come up to me after the gig like, "Oh, I see why you do that. It makes sense." I'm like, yeah. So stop trying to bully people into doing what you think they should do. Anyway,
it's what's convenient for front of house,
right?
Emanuel.
Right. But you don't tell a guitar player to go direct because you don't want to deal with their amp. You don't tell anyone else to do that. Don't tell me to do that. But yeah, if we're talking about being, a rock star, doing the rock and roll thing, and what that means for me, I think, playing through a tube amp is like step one. That's like step one for me, as far as gear goes.
Okay. Stylistically, what do you bring to the table?
Stylistically, so I think first of all, I always want to be, how do I put this? I want what I'm playing to come across. I want it to be felt, and whatever that calls for in a particular moment. I want to get the point across. Sometimes that's being melodic. Sometimes that's taking advantage of the fact that I don't have any frets. I would like to. I like to think of it as kind of guitarish, but not. Like I'm definitely playing violin, but like when you hear it, you kind of think, is that a violin? Is that a guitar? What is that? I don't know what that is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've listened to your live album, and you've got one other guitarist.
Yeah,
and at times it is a toss-up to figure which is which. Speaking of getting your point across, lyrically, what do you want people to be taking away?
Ooh. So I think, and I saw interview with Olivia Dean where she said this, where she basically said, like, I can tell you what was going on in my mind, the specific thing that I'm writing about, but that's not going to come across if you listen. People are going to take from the song whatever meaning they're going to take from it. But I think the main themes that I like to pursue in my music is a love for joy, a love for spontaneity, a love for love. I think the things that we come across, I think they should be cherished. If you're not enjoying the moments that you have in life or with someone, they pass, and then what do you only have the memory of them. So yeah, those are a lot of the themes that I go for, and I hope that comes across lyrically.
Surviving, merely trying not to drown, but I thrive when I capsize into your life. I'm walking under pastel skies to you. I'm walking under pastel skies. I'll see you soon.
A love for joy, a love for spontaneity, a love for love. All those coming across lyrically as well as musically here in Emanuel Wynter's live version of Pastel Skies, off of his album From Orbit. Wynter has been fascinated with astronomy since childhood, by the way. The evidence is all over his recorded output going back to the first song he published, Cosmos. On the subject of live performance, in another interview, Wynter talked about needing to check off 2 of 3 boxes to say yes to playing a gig. Good people, good pay, and good music. When I asked him if he was meeting that requirement these days, he replied that between live gigs with his own band, which he loves, session work, and even corporate and wedding gigs, he's happy where he's at. Which is saying a lot, because you can ask any professional musician that question, and I bet a great many would not share that opinion about their own shows. Live albums, album sales, merchandise, royalties, none of it's an easy task to master as a music artist. And music artists need a combination of all of these, or other combinations which might include things like teaching their instrument to be successful enough to keep their heads above water in the music business. I asked Emanuel if playing shows with his band is the bulk of his income.
Live performances. I thought people were moving away from CDs and physical media, but that has just taken on a boom in the past several years, to the point where I want to get CDs printed for my live album. I did a trio session in Greensboro a couple years ago. I have all the audio there, print CDs for that. New album that I'm working on, I'm going to have CDs for that. I wish I could do vinyl, but it's a lot more expensive to make it. The upfront costs are pretty high, but that would be something I'd love to do in the future. But also just being like, hey, you know, especially if we're at a show and you like the music, you can take home a copy. You can have it. You don't have to worry about, you know, streaming it. Like, you can have it. And I think that is resonating with people more so now than it was even a few years ago. There's just been an influx of just people wanting physical media, wanting to have it, which is great. I want people to have it. I like physical media myself, you know?
Yeah, I know a lot of people don't play CDs anymore, but, you know, an older generation, Gen X and older, are definitely going to be candidates to buy your CD at your show. And then it's kind of, like you say, become a niche with younger generations and even cassettes. There's a subculture with cassettes.
Yeah.
With your audience, how does it work with your audience? Like, can you describe a typical audience? Who gets it? Who doesn't? Who shows up thinking you're one thing and they walk away with something completely different?
I think I'm trying to figure this out because I don't know, and I should know because you know, I should know from a business standpoint. I should know. I'm trying to figure it out. I don't know. I don't know. You got me.
We'll use this as a sort of a poll or a referendum of sorts. Everyone listening, fill in this blank.
There we go.
Emanuel Wynter, it's so great to have you on.
Thank you for having me.
Rounding out this episode of Southern Songs and Stories with Emanuel Wynter's live version of his song Sugar from his album From Orbit, which you can find on streaming platforms and on his website, EmanuelWynter.com. That's Emanuel with one M and Winter with a Y. Thanks to Charlotte photographer, writer, and music producer Daniel Coston for letting me use his photos of Emanuel Wynter from his band set in Elkin, North Carolina at the Milltown Get Down in fall 2025. Daniel also shot the cover for the album From Orbit. Thanks as well to Public Radio WNCW's Carol Millette for helping me learn more about double stops on the violin, and to former WNCW intern Joshua Ming, who wrote and performed our theme songs. And thanks to you for listening. We encourage you to follow this series wherever you listen to podcasts and are especially grateful for top ratings and your reviews. You can follow this series on social media at South Stories on Instagram, at Southern Songs and Stories on Facebook, and you can view these episodes and a lot more on my YouTube channel at the handle Joe Kendrick NC. We can also send you newsletters via Substack, where you can read the scripts of these podcasts and get updates on what we're doing and planning in our quest to explore and celebrate the unfolding history and culture of music rooted in the American South and going beyond to the styles and artists that it inspired and informed. I'm your host and producer, Joe Kendrick, and this is Southern Songs and Stories, the music of the South and the artists who make it.
And this lies in my head that don't reconcile. I've seen you do your own thing solo, patient in your own skin, and I know if we jumped in, it doesn't have to be the wrong thing, the wrong thing. So quench my thirst, why don't you? Darling, quench my thirst. And oh, sugar, I'm sweet on you in every way. I tried and tried, but I just can't contain. No, I just wanna roll with you, and I won't try to run away. Just be my sweet thing, my everything, my everything, my everything, thing, baby. I just wanna roll with you, and I won't try to run away. Just be my sweet thing, my everything, my everything, my everything,
You speak multiple languages.
No, I don't.
It says it on your profile. It says you speak Japanese and Mandarin.
I'm gonna have to change that. That was some. I was being silly in high school. In high school, I put that on there because I took French in high school, so I put French on there, and then I did some martial arts, so we'd learn some Japanese words in there, some Chinese words, because the dojo that I studied at, we did some Ishinryu. And then we did some a little bit of kung fu stuff there. So I was just being silly in high school, and because I knew some of the commands and stuff, I put that on my Facebook. I need to take that off.
Okay, cool.
That's so funny.